Hello everyone, my name is Michael Lelièvre. I am the QA coordinator and localization manager at SUPERHOT. Prior to that, I was a LQA tester and test lead, and I worked that job for about 10 years and across, I think, 250 projects. More recently, I've been working with a lot of indie devs, and as I was joining the project, I noticed something that is quite consistent is that many indie devs do not know what localization is. What are the costs, the challenges, simply, what you should do to make your localization project happen. So today we're gonna brush off those basic questions that I've heard often, and we're gonna do a FAQ of localization, a short video that hopefully will show you why I love localization so much and why you should localize your game. So here goes. So let's start with the beginning. What is localization and what is its definition? If I had to ask you what localization is, most of you will tell me that it's about translating text from one language to the other, and you will be right. It is translating text, but it's not only that. It's also about cultural vetting. It's about age rating, certification, and all that jazz. So basically, if I had to summarize it in one sentence, I would say localization is the process that allows your game to be marketed, played, and enjoyed by as many people as possible, regardless of their countries of origin, regardless of their language, and regardless of their cultural background. And talking about cultural vetting, one example that comes to mind is a famous one, is in World of Warcraft, where for the Chinese version of the game, every texture or character model that was showing bones and guts and gory stuff had to be changed for something more soft. Because in China, it is unacceptable culturally to show human remains in medias. So yeah, that's what localization did for World of Warcraft, for example. In games, we lead players through a story, through game mechanics, and through a world that have been designed hopefully to be as instinctive, as immersive, and as fun to navigate as possible. Text is a big part of it, as you know. Menus tell the players how to navigate, instructions tell the players how to play, and stories tell the players what is going on around them. While it's true that more and more people are becoming bilingual around the world, there are still a lot of people, actually I think it will be the major part of the population, that do not have any incentive to learn another language, especially English in this case. And I can relate with my own friends. My own friends who do not speak English will not buy early access games if they are not translated, and will start buying them only after localization has been implemented. So you can say that the user experience is extremely aggravated if you don't have localization in your games. And for some people, if not most people in foreign countries, it will be actually a deal breaker. So your incentives there are multiple. Obviously, you want to do it because it will increase your sales. It's gonna make your game more accessible, and by extension, it will increase your ratings and your reach on vending platforms. It's been shown actually that mobile games that have been localized have seen a huge increase in the ratings on the app stores. And also Steam. Steam has a filter for reviews in specific languages, and some people do not read reviews in foreign languages, they only read reviews in their own language. So if you localize your game, it will give an incentive to players to make a review in their own language, and it will give you a bigger visibility, give your game a bigger visibility on this platform specifically. Another implicit reason why you should localize your game is that when you do that, you make people feel important and considered. One example that comes to mind is with Polish people. Polish have been recently more and more localized in games, and this is something that Polish people have noticed and are thankful for. I've heard that many times from my Polish friends, that they were happy and proud to see that games were being localized in Polish. Can't hurt. So there is no real good answer to that question. I cannot tell you how to localize your game exactly in which language. That should be defined by your production team based on things like what is your target audience, in which countries do you sell games, in which countries do you not sell games, this kind of things. But typically the answer to that specific question would be commonly used languages are what we call the IFIGS languages. IFIGS stands for English, French, Italian, German, and Spanish. Those are your typical go-to languages for any kind of localization work. But realistically, in 2020, you also want to hit the Brazilian, Japanese, Korean, traditional and simplified Chinese, as well as Russian. Those are big player base countries, and localizing a game and ignoring those languages will be detrimental to your sales for sure. Finally, more recently, we have observed an emergence of some other languages like Polish, Arabic, Dutch, and Scandinavian languages. So those we should keep tab on for future localization work. They are not mandatory languages, but they are good to have, I think. Localizing your game isn't cheap, admittedly. Well, you could simply put everything through a translation software and call it a day, but I strongly advise against it for the good reason that if you do that, you will be botching your game's translations for sure. And if that happens, both your players and media outlets will give you terrible reviews and participate to the downfall of your game's ratings. The reason why localization is pricey is because when you want to add one language, you need to hire a translator, a proofreader, and a localization game tester in an ideal case scenario if you have the budget. And localization game testers are the most costly of all. They are more expensive than functionality game testers for the good reason that vendors set requirements to be more restrictive than functionality game testers. Localization game tester is basically a functionality game tester, but with exceptional linguistic skills, exceptional cultural background, and ideally native from a specific country. So all these restrictive requirements make the salary higher because they are harder to find. So all in all, if you want to localize your game, which I advise you to do, you are in for a long credit roll and a costly process, but I can guarantee that it is widely worth it if you manage to sell your game across the world. Browsing numbers here and there have shown that less than 30% of media consumers are English native speakers. And while in the 70% remaining, there might be a lot like me that play games in English, a big portion of them must be reliant on having a localized version of the game. So let's imagine you have just kickstarted the production of your latest awesome game, and you want in the future to localize this game. So what do you want to do about it? The first thing you want to do is you want to prepare your game for localization, to be ready for localization. Things like a game designer and a programmer should think about dynamic text boxes, auto-scaling, auto-sizing that will allow longer words in translations to not bleed over the boundaries, to not overrun, overlap, and cut off in many places. That will save you a lot of time during LQA, which we have established that is extremely expensive sometimes. You want also maybe to do a systematic referencing of strings of text instead of hard-coded data in your code, so that you avoid unlocalized bugs and placeholders and whatnot. You want also to find a nice plugin for your engine so that you can re-import, export, and import your text with only one click, which is something that you're going to have to do a lot during localization. Finally, you want maybe also to prepare a bunch of documentation for your translation vendor. You want to set up a glossary list. You want to set up a document that explains the story, that summarizes the story and the intrigue of your game, that disambiguates some aspects of the lore. The more information you give to your translators, and the more time efficient they will be during translations. So you have prepared your game. You feel confident that you can start localizing your game. What you want to do next? You want to designate somebody to take care of it. I've seen many companies use localization project managers for their localizations, and I think it's the right way to go. Some other companies put that responsibility onto producers, and some other companies, smaller companies, they just do it ad hoc, you know, like anyone who feels like doing it will do it, which I do not recommend personally, because from all the examples that come to mind, every time localization was not ideal, in an ideal state at the end of it. So yeah, designate somebody to do your project management. Localization is a complex process and long, and it asks for a lot of coordination. Next up, you have your files prepared. Your game is pretty and dynamic, and your localization project manager is excited about the project. So what you're gonna do? Well, you want to find a translation vendor, and that's next. You want to have your text translated from the source language to your target languages. Once you have defined those target languages, you get across a bunch of translation vendors, and you ask them for prices, you survey them basically, and you get one that you can trust. It's important to have trust into your vendors, because you can hardly verify their work yourself. And if a whole language has been botched by one translator, it's going to be hard to fix it during pre-production, and that's going to be a problem for you. So you want to have a trustworthy, professional translation vendor. Don't go with the cheapest ones. That's my advice, because cheap vendors often mean they don't have the flexibility or the skill base workers hired in the company. So I will recommend to just find a translation vendor that one of your colleagues, one of your friends, or somebody that you know have worked with and that has had very good results. And I recommend that you always credit them. Crediting translators is not something that is often done, but it's something that to me seems pretty cool. They are a big part of the localization process. They are the ones that are going to build your game and your story in foreign languages. Not crediting them is not cool in my opinion. So now you have received the translations from your vendor and you have implemented them into your game. So what's next? What's next is verification in the game. So you want to do localization quality assurance testing on it. Admittedly, you could just have it done by your community. If you have a strong community, that is like present and eager and friendly and all this, you can ask them to have a look at a branch on Steam or to have a look at a version of the game with localized terms and let you know how the quality of the translations are. But using that method, you should not expect professional work. If you want professional work and if you want your game to be perfect, the only solution is to go with an LQA vendor. There are plenty out there, and like we discussed, they are a bit costly, but this specific step of localization is one of the most important because it is the team that is going to have the final say on the state of the localization in the game. While translation vendors are important to build your text, LQA are important to make sure that everything is right in its right place and in the right context. So yeah, once you're done with LQA, you do like a few back and forth with them with bugs, you do some debugging, and after a few weeks, you've got a game that is fully localized and ready to be rolled out to the rest of the world. Congratulations! Of course, like everything else, perfect localization requires a lot of work, a lot of time, and a lot of money. But the answer is definitely yes. You can reach a perfect state of localization in your game if you put enough time and money to it. To give you a better understanding on how localization QA works, localization QA is, in my opinion, much easier than functionality QA in the sense that it is easier to test text in one area than to test every single code and features and colliders and all the aspects of functionality QA. Localization QA bugs are also in 99% of the time 100% repro bugs, so they don't need investigation, they don't need extensive debugging, they are easy fixes for the most part. So localization QA is where you're gonna make your game perfect, and there are ways to do it if you take your time for it. Also, it's worth noting that destructive testing is almost inexistent in LQA. There are some test cases that can be done that are considered as destructive testing, but ultimately it's very minimal. So now, what would be a good indicator of a successful localization in game would be, the way I do it is that when one of the games I worked on is released, I'm browsing reviews and I'm trying to find reviews that mention localization. And if they mention it and praise it, great, you've got your clear indicator. But if never it is mentioned, localization is mentioned, and that nobody complains about it, to me that's also a win. That's also a good indicator that localization works in your game. All right, everyone, this is the end of this video. I would like to thank you all for your attention. I hope that it was instructive, that for those of you who didn't know what localization is about, that you learned something in that video. And until next time, I wish you good luck and great success in making your games and localizing them. Bye-bye.
Okay, so we are recording. I will stop my video and then there. So, hi everybody. I am interviewing Mika, who now works at SUPERHOT, who is a quality assurance tester, but has worked with teams such as SUPERHOT Presents, Team Laser Beams, Teenage Blob, and I have a couple of questions about localization, which Mika will answer. So, Mika, how did you get into localization, and how can other people get into localization?
Well, personally, I got into localization through QA testing. I joined a United Kingdom company based in Brighton called Babel Media. I used to be like the number one outsourcer in the industry. And I joined there as a LQA tester, learned on the spot, then got promotions. After promotions, references, moved up the ladder, moved to Montreal, and then I moved back to Europe, joined SUPERHOT, and I helped them with localization. And starting from there, I started to do localization project management. And it's doing well, thanks to you also in part. And yeah, meeting with the team Laserbeam, for example, was great. I recommend people that want to do localization. Most of them will start with translation or maybe project management. Most of them have backgrounds in linguistics, which is not my case. Myself, I had just very, very solid education as a child, and my linguistic skills in French are excellent. So that's why I was praised as a LQA tester. But anybody can join an LQA team as long as they have the right cultural background and the right linguistic skills and also the right mindset for the job. And then, you know, it's just a matter of climbing the ladder, I suppose. Yeah, it ranges a lot from translators to project managers, I think.
Okay, since we're in the topic of translations, one of the things is that a lot of things can be lost in translation. So,
Yeah.
how do you approach things like the translations of jokes, context, pop culture reference?
Yeah, so this is a good one. Like, this is a funny one actually to do. It's one of the things that I liked the most when I was a LQA tester myself, was to fix references, jokes in achievements and stuff like that. There's a lot of jokes that get lost in translations, play on words mostly, but also like references to pop culture. I remember a text change that I had to make in French. I had to make in French because the joke was about in English about the I don't remember the name of this guy, the guy that the anchor of who wants to be a millionaire in UK or in the US, I don't remember, and I had to translate that to fix it because the name of the anchor in this country will not speak to French speakers, so I had to change it to the equivalent in French. A lot of things like this. You can also have um, like any play on word or jokes, even a bad joke would be interpreted very badly in other countries. If you say in Brazil, for example, if you joke about um, the Death Squad, this terrible thing that happened in the 80s, that would probably be censored or stuff like that. Things that are very topical will be changed or amended or censored.
Okay, you recently worked with Team Laserbeam, a teenage blog that had a gender neutral character, which is the blog.
Yeah.
Like, how does one do, like, because like a lot of languages can be gendered, like how did you go about it?
Yeah, so gender neutrality, it's actually a topic that is very interesting because right now it's something that is emerging a lot in our societies, in our Western societies. And there is a lot of, I think there's going to be a lot more games that are going to have characters that are gender neutral or agender, or, you know, even I suspect in sci-fi for androids, beings that do not have any genders that are referenced in the source language, English, as they will need to be translated somehow to be agendered. So when we worked on Teenage Blob, the first thing that Team Laserbeam does, amazing devs, by the way, they are pretty amazing people. When they approached me with this project, they said the first thing they wanted to tell me was, there is gender neutrality in the game. All our characters are gender neutral. And it was not a political statement or anything. It was a piece of art that where characters needed to be blobs, to not have any gender, and they were referring themselves to each other with they and gender neutral job titles and whatnot. So immediately the question that popped in my head is how we're gonna make this happen for Latin languages, and as well as Polish, Russian, all of those languages that have heavy gender markers, a lot of gender markers in their grammar. So we had a few solutions had like that we could use. One of those was to use this neologism, yeah. Those are the new words, new terms, new grammar forms that are suggested by communities, mostly the LGBTQ community and whatnot. So we could have used that, but the principle of localization being to make a game that is understandable by as many people as possible. Using neologism is never a good idea, in my opinion, because you may confuse more people than you will deserve the purpose of making it inclusive. So the way we did go with that is that we tricked, we rephrased, we used cheats in our sentences. I took a bunch of French dialogues because I'm French myself, and I tried to find ways to turn the phrase so that the meaning is kept, but no gender marker is visible. So that it's something like "Hey kid," that will be like "Hey fiston" in French, which is a masculine word. I changed it to "Hey blob." Yeah, like try to find tricks to go around and circumvent it without betraying the language per se, without creating a speech that is not understandable by the most. Teenage blob. That was something that was very fun actually. We had very good comebacks from the community on this. They were very happy with the results. Translators did a good job. Very happy with it.
Okay, now that you mentioned community, there are a lot of developers that prefer when they release the game, it is the gamers or the fans of the game that translate it. What are your thoughts about releasing games that are community translated, especially when games are in early access, versus hiring professional services?
Well, having your community work for you, especially if you're an indie dev and communities are here to provide a free service, it's something that you may want to consider if you don't have budget or things like this. Localization in general is a costly process. You can like cut corners here and there to try and get an okay result, but it all depends really on the quality that you want to have. I'm not saying that community translations are bad, because admittedly there's been examples, many of them, you can find them on the workshop, many community translations that are sometimes better than the translations that come after the game has gotten a lot of success. It has happened. But in general, it's taking always a gamble to go with your community, because you don't necessarily have in the lot people that are linguistically strong, but they will know the context very well. They are passionate about the game. But community translations is a good, I think, emergency solution, or if you really want to please your community and they're eager to go for it, I mean, why not? But one should not expect very easy process. For example, for debugging, you cannot ask people to follow a training like testers do and write good bugs. They will give the information in a very chaotic way, because it's by nature, it's a chaotic approach to translations. So yeah, globally, I don't recommend it, but to each his own, I want to say. And if this is something that you cannot afford, that's always a viable solution, but that's a lot of organization, I guess. I haven't met with devs that have had their game translated by the community, or at least I met with them, but I did not ask how it went. But myself, I never organized that. I would like to organize that. That would be fun, I think, to do it once at least, to organize a community around bugs. See if you can train a few, get them like free skills along the way. Why not? That's an interesting concept, actually.
That's actually super interesting. Maybe we should do that in the future.
But that's free
Um,
labor, like it's not really great from a ethic point of view. You always ask your community to do it not even as a favor. Usually the communities, I guess, they are the ones stepping up and saying, hey, your game is not translated. It would be great if you could give us like the text lines and we translate it ourselves. I think it's always on this basis. I don't think there's a lot of devs asking for the community to do the translations. I'm not sure how it works really.
what are your thoughts about, so if you're a developer and then you do have the budget, how much does localization usually cost and how can developers plan for it?
Yeah, if you have a budget and you don't worry too much about money, you have a publisher that wants to pay all the log for you. You should expect, it depends a lot on how many words you have and how big is the game in terms of content. Of course, like always the bigger, the more expensive because you're gonna need more translated text and you're gonna need more testing and you're gonna need more debugging and all of this. But as a rule of thumb, it's good to know something I don't mention in my video, the FAQ video that I made, is that translators are paid by the word, so that the volume of the text increases the price that you will pay translators, the money that you will pay for translators. And LQA is paid by the hours. So if you have a complex game with no debug and no easy access to each and every string, you will have a lot of problems and a lot of cost to cover your game and to test it. So that will be one factor of cost increase. But yeah, we would say like I think it's 0.025 euro per word average per language. The more languages are rare, the more translators are rare, the higher the rate is. So for Dutch, for example, it's higher than for French, English to French, or like a Japanese to Chinese will be much more expensive than an English to French, And LQA gravitates around, I think, an average between the vendors, 25 to 30 euro per hour, something like this. Would be expensive, 30 euro, I think, but something like that, yeah.
Thank you very much. Like, I think that is super helpful for a lot of people who want to do like localization. Another question is like, why should game developers or indie developers considering hiring a professional localization service?
Well, because they would not have time to take care of it themselves. it's quite time consuming to take care of that. There's a lot of aspects to it. I want to say if you that would be to hire like a manager or somebody, or having a producing company or publishing house do that for you, I guess. When it comes to translating everything yourself, if you have a small game, it's perfectly doable, I think. But you will need to rely heavily on vendors to provide. There's a lot of trust to be had with vendors, translation vendors and LQA vendors alike. But if you are tight on budget, or you think that you can handle it yourself, you will just have to provide a lot of legworks in like creating the files or dumping everything on the translators. Will not save any time or cost or anything. That will be detrimental, I think. So yeah, managers are, I think, are necessary for this kind of coordination project.
What are the usual challenges that developers have with integrating localization?
Well, from experience, the biggest issue every time is building the libraries and the fonts and all of this. It's something that people don't have any incentive to do before they start actually localizing the game. And before we see a first build that is localized, we start to see things that are off. The first rounds of testing after implementation of text is always full of code issues, like little tweaks and codes. sometimes design issues as well, like, oh, we wanted this menu to look like this because it fits the design, but the boxes are too small and maybe we need to readjust a little bit the language selector because we're adding more languages. This is the kind of challenges we see. But the very, very first one that people are facing, indie devs are not ready to get started on their game, is to have a plugin that integrates the text properly. Because usually when people build the games, they hard code text, they create a line of code that says, show this text and write the text inside the code. So they are not getting ready for this. And if they are not, they're gonna get a lot of like time consuming and annoying bugs to fix during the early stages of LQA.
Okay, and then as a general, closing statement for this interview, how important is localization in the games industry?
So to summarize everything, I won't say that if you are a game designer or a game producer or a game programmer or a game artist, and you're making a game and you're making games because you want to give joy to people, which is in essence the number one incentive that I've noticed in all my colleagues that I've been working with, the people from SUPERHOT, the people from Team Laserbeam, even at vendors, everybody is so passionate about games. They all want the games to be as enjoyable as possible. And you can't do that if you cannot reach this objective if you don't extend it to most of the people in the world, just because of language barrier, especially in story-driven games. You have to translate your game, because otherwise you're depriving like the 2/3 of the population in the world who doesn't speak English from enjoying your game. So from any stage of development, that should be the number one concern of game dev, making the game enjoyable. And I think as myself, as I was an LQA tester with very little impact on what games were doing, the games I was working on, I felt proud to be part of this work that is making the game enjoyable to my fellow Frenchmen. And I knew that every time I was fixing a bug, every time I was making an instruction clearer, I was making the game experience better for them. And that was something I was taking a lot of pride of. And this is something that makes me happy to do this job. I'm happy to know that when I see a YouTube video, I watched a Let's Play in Russian. I don't speak Russian, but I watched the Let's Play in Russian, and I had the subtitles from YouTube, and I could see the reaction of the person that was playing. And they were like laughing at the joke. So that's a hit for me. That's a big win. If they laugh at the joke of the game that I helped translate, that means that the job is done. That's why it's important to me. And then we can talk about more like close down to earth details and reasons which are very important too, about sales, ratings, having a better visibility, being covered by other medias, by foreign medias, having reaching an international state, globally speaking. Localization is important. It's as important as anything else, I guess, in the games.
Thank you very much, Mika, for your time and the video about FAQ of localization. I think a lot of developers, learn a lot and hopefully plan better. Where could people find you, like if they wanted questions or like if they wanted to learn?
I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn, and I have the same picture than on the website. If you look up Michael Lelièvre on LinkedIn, QA coordinator at SUPERHOT, you will find me. They can send me a message on LinkedIn. There's no problem. I can reply.
Thank you again.
Thank you very much.
Have a great day.
You too.